Hello and welcome to another edition of Luminar Coffee Break. I'm your host, Vanelli. Now, our topic today is the wonderful world of macro photography, and joining me is Skylum Ambassador, and she's also a commercial photographer. Please welcome Laura Tillinghast. Hello.
Hi, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Great. Let me pull you on one moment. And of course, it's worked in practice. Here we go. There we are. We gotcha. So now, what type of photography do you do?
I am primarily a commercial photographer, and so I do a lot of work for advertising and lots of stuff that ends up on websites, social media use, and then I do some editorial work as well.
Oh, that's great. All right. So now let's talk a little bit about. I'm sorry, I shared our screen. One moment. Let me get back to where we were. So let's 1 second. Let me try to get both of us up on the screen together. There we are. All right. So talk to me about you have macro photography and close-up photography.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So could you explain to us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So I like to do macro photography just on vacation and whenever I have time to do photography for myself and not for a client. I do use macro lenses sometimes with product photography, but today I'm talking more about the kind of thing that I do because I love photography versus what I'm doing for a client. So in this case, Luminar saved me because I didn't have a macro lens with me. So while we're going to look at some of the problems that arose from getting close as a camera will allow without actually having a macro lens. You can still do close-up photography using Luminar because it has your back and the things that a macro lens brings to the table that you may be missing with your normal camera.
So if somebody were to ask you, what's the difference between a macro lens and a zoom lens?
Well, technically, it's just the space between where the plane is and how much distance is between the lens itself and the capture plane.
Yeah, so minimal focal distance.
Exactly. So you can get a lot closer because of that, you can get a lot closer to your subject, and other lenses have a limitations often of like 4 feet. Sometimes, the longer lenses, it'll be even worse. Yeah, like 6 feet. I have a big zoom lens that I can't get very close to people with because it's really meant for zooming things that are far away. But a macro lens, you can get as close as you want to an object. In this case, I wasn't using one, so I went the macro or the maximum amount of distance, and I was a couple feet away from the flower with my lens all the way to it's a zoom lens. I had it all the way at the as close as I could get.
Which is great. And a lot of times with the macro lens, if you're photographing on a quarter, it can be the actual size.
Right, so that's true.
Up to it, the quarter is a quarter. And because of you, I think I showed you this. Let's see if I can pull it up. I took that flower. I think I sent you the image of the flower. And because of you, I had to go out because you're on the West Coast and I'm on the East Coast of Florida. So to have you wake up extra early to do the Facebook coffee break wasn't good for you. So we had you do the later one, which is at 5 o'clock. So I went outside during a rainstorm and photographed that flower. And I'm laughing as I'm doing it because it was definitely an interesting shoot. And we want to thank Fujifilm for being our partner. They loaned me the XT3 with the 80 millimeter 80 millimeter macro lens, and I was able to get out there and I ripped about maybe 75 to 80 frames or images, and I got it. Now, what do you do to keep your images in focus? What are some of your tips?
Right. So it can be difficult in a situation like this because I don't have great eyesight, so I rely on autofocus, and I use the different settings of autofocus to make sure I'm focusing in the right section when I'm doing macro photography. It's a little different than if you're photographing a portrait. And then often when you're outside, you can get everything right and use a tripod and really have the focus nailed, and then a breeze comes up and starts to, the flower sways from side to side. So in this case, I was just on a trip, and that's why I brought these. Is I wanted to do macro photography without macro equipment. I did the best I could with my camera, and then Luminar kind of fixes the rest. When I have the ability to have all my macro equipment with me, I have a Wimberley clamp, and I use that to I put, it basically is a clamp on a bendy arm, and I'll put that on a stand and then clamp the clamping part to the stem so that it stabilizes it. And so when the breeze comes up, maybe the petals will ruffle a little bit, but it won't move from the area I have the focus locked in.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
And by the way, real quick, my good friend Julie asked, and we already answered this question, is sometimes with her Canon lens, she gets up close to the picture, but she can't take the photo, and that's because we already talked about it not being the minimal focus distance is what you need in a case like that. All right. Right. So, all right. So, what's your typical f-stop? Because I'm not a macro photographer, and I'm a sports and portrait photographer, but I love macro photography. My mistake in the very beginning, I had this beautiful ladybug. It looked like it was about to jump off the leaf. I captured it, but everything I shot was 2.8. And macro photography, I realized, oh wow, 2.8 is kind of really shallow. And if you don't pinpoint exactly where you want that focus to be, everything. So what are some of your tricks?
Yeah, that's a good point. So the important thing to do too when you're setting this up is ask yourself what you want to be in focus. So a lot of macro photography, it can be different. I see a lot of it where the very middle of the flower is in focus, like no matter what the angle is at. And so if that's the case, then you ask yourself, well, how much do I want the rest of the flower to fall out of focus? If you want it to really fall out of focus quickly, then go to something like 2.8, and really only the middle of the flower will be in focus. If you want it to be less dramatic of a going from tack sharp to soft focus to all the way out into bokeh, then something like f4. I'm often shooting at f4 and 5.6 when I'm this close to a flower, and that ensures that the majority of the flower is in focus, but the background's going to have nice bokeh going on. And now with this one, I can't remember, so let's look.
And let's look at this, and I'm going to swap over. One moment. There we go.
So I had 6.3.
Oh, beautiful. Beautiful.
So in this situation too, it was cloudy, but the sun was coming in and out of the clouds and making it bright, muted. So I was shooting primarily on 5.6, and then as I saw the light change, just looking through the viewfinder, I would adjust aperture, shutter speed, both, just to get the right exposure. So here I ended up thinking I needed a little less light and going to 6.3, probably because the sun was starting to come out. Does that make sense?
Yep. Now, do you use flash photography when you're doing some of your macro?
I do, but generally I only do it when I'm trying to compensate for the fact that the sun is behind clouds. Like if I use flash fill and macro, I usually put it behind the flower and as a highlight, so that it looks like a sunny garden. I tend not to, with macro, put the light pointing right at the subject like you would a portrait. I tend to put it behind or to the side.
I like that.
Because that's generally more what you're seeing when you're going through a garden and taking a photo. You rarely stand with the sun at your back.
Exactly.
Because that lighting's a little blah.
Now, I will admit, as a portrait photographer, they even call Mike Cabasi, the guy who shoots for NCIS and all the TV shows, I told him what I did. I'm all wet. I'm exhausted. I got the shot. Came in. He goes, why don't you just pluck the flower or the weed and come inside, put a black backdrop, and take the photo? I said, Mike, that was my first choice, but then I couldn't talk to a lot of the macro people or people that are into nature and say, instead of me respecting the flower and leaving it, I was selfish to pluck it. I know that's bad. So I left it. So, all right. So show us, what are some of your favorite editing tricks?
Well, and it really depends to in defense, if it's your own garden, pick it yourself. Who cares? It's your flower. You can enjoy it inside in a vase after you're done shooting or something. But yeah, I like to put the black background behind a flower out in the garden to get that look of a studio without actually plucking it. And the benefit of doing that is if you're lucky, like in this shot, and a bee comes along, that definitely won't happen in your inside studio where you get a willing photo subject to just fly in and pose for a little bit and then fly away. This shot, I was going around a garden shooting. I had limited time and I was on a trip. When I go traveling, I don't take my workhorse camera. It's extremely heavy. And as much as I love it, when I'm on vacation, I want to feel light, like I can run and not be weighed down by my equipment. So I was using the Canon M50, which is a little mirrorless camera. It doesn't have a full frame, but it's really good for vacation snaps and things that you want a good capture, but it's not, the end of the world either way, whether that you get the shot or not. So that's what I was working with. The first thing that I look at with this photograph is that it's off center, and I probably that was me and not the wind. I could blame the wind if I wanted. I didn't have my Wimberley plant because I was with a bunch of other people and didn't have all my macro equipment. But let's look over. So the first thing I do so that I'm not distracted by the weird cropping or the weird composition is to crop it. So ultimately, I see this as a square crop because the flower is so symmetrical in terms of how, the angle it's at with the camera. So I'm just going to come in and even out the composition so that the middle of the flower and the bee are right in the middle. Okay, so now that's a lot better already because I'm not distracted by all the other stuff that's going on. Now, while this is in focus, it's a little soft. And yeah, I probably did get a little bit of motion blur from wind, but the beauty of Luminar is that I can save this shot even without that tight focus of a macro lens with me. So I do that with the details enhancer. So to be honest, I don't know, like Vanelli, you know a lot more about the program than I do. You can talk about the difference between these. I generally just slide the sliders until it looks better, but doesn't look too crispy. So I just slowly drag these to the right until they look about right, and the sharpening all the way at the bottom I do last. Large details I left alone this time, and I just slowly pull it back and forth until it looks better. So now the bee and the yellow part of the flower looks much better. This is how soft it was before, and with one tool we've already got it nice and tight there. So after the details, I always want to do the noise next so that it doesn't look like I sharpened it too aggressively. So slowly I'm just going to drag this to the right until I see an improvement. See, that's better already. And then with color, go a little further. So now this makes it a little less obvious that I was using a sharpener. And here again, before and after. So it's pretty amazing. Now you can see the individual hairs on the bee's back, whereas before they were kind of blurring together into a little puff ball. Now, that's the main thing.
Isn't that amazing? I love detail enhancer, and I do love how our engineers, like you just said, you may not know what each one of them does. You just know I turn that slider. If it looks better, I keep it.
Yeah,
I bring it back.
exactly. And you know what you like and what's going to look good. So they're just giving you the tools to figure it out for yourself. So once I'm there, then I like to go up and use AI Enhance. So everything looks pretty good on this shot. I'm not thinking that it's lacking anything in general. Like, it doesn't lack contrast. It doesn't lack vibrancy. So I just use the AI accent to give the whole shot like some punch. And same thing, I just slowly drag it. And so now if you turn this off and on, it really just makes the shot sing. So here's before. When I click after, look at the color, the contrast, and brightness, and just see that it just looks better overall. So that I'm pretty much done with this shot. However, I feel like when you have all the action in the middle, it can be nice to use a vignette to really sell that. So with the vignette, I'm going to use the dark end of it, because if you can have a light vignette or a dark vignette. So I'm going to drag to the right, oops, wrong way, drag to the left until the darkness in the corners really just helps the flower to pop out. So here it is without the vignette. And now with the added vignette, I've just darkened the background and really made the bee even more of the star. So that's all I've done with this shot. It really was just details and then denoise, give it the wash of goodness with the AI accent, and then give it a little vignette. So before and after is here and after. And if we do this, you can really see the difference in the colors and everything.
Awesome.
So any questions on how I did that pretty fast? If there's any questions.
Oh, that's good. No, keep going. And of course, a few of the people are talking about my buddy Bill is saying he's a stacker. He loves stacking.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that used several times, stacking images together, focus,
Hmm.
and that's
Right.
something, do you want to explain that a little bit? I'm going to put you back on.
Sure. Yeah. So focus stacking can be great when you have limitations of what your lens can do in terms of depth of field and how much you want to be in focus or out of focus. If you're doing focus stacking, it's hard to do that outdoors with the wind blowing. But if you have a still day or you're using the Wimberley clamp and you trust it, wait for the breeze to die down. And then it's similar to HDR when you take several photographs with using a tripod so that you can stack them and everything will be cohesive. And then you can pick and choose what you want in focus and what you don't want in focus. And so whoever said that they like to do that, mad props to you, because it's a lot of work. It pays off in the end, but it's a lot of attention to detail, and takes commitment.
Well, that's great. That's great. Do you have another image for us, or was that?
I have one more in the same day. Now, this time the sun went all the way behind the clouds and it was very dull. However, I was further away, and so I got a better sharpness in the photo. So on this one, the thing that it really needs is more vibrance, because we lost that contrast from the light in the scene. So again, I'm distracted by this flower down in the bottom left corner. So I'm going to switch to a square crop and then just make the shot really focused on where the action is. And I think I'll pull this down just a little more. Okay, so now we're going a little bit with the rule of thirds, in that the bee is in the left-hand side of the shot and not in the center. It doesn't always have to be that way. So now we've gotten rid of the distracting elements. We're working just with the parts that we want. So let's go back here. Now this one, since I don't have a big focus problem, I go first to AI Enhance, and I really just let this accent filter do its thing. Because as you drag it up, so you can see I like to slowly drag it to see what AI thinks is wrong with my image too, right? And then you kind of learn what the AI is thinking. So as you drag it slowly, it's lightening the background, and then intensifying contrast and vibrance in the flowers themselves. So I'm only going to use it at about 30 or so, because I'm going to do some other things on it. But I always use this as a starting point if I don't have anything wrong with the exposure, for example, that I should address first. Okay, so then now let's look. I think the exposure is a little muted, so we're going to just increase the brightness a bit, not too much. And then with that, I always want to increase contrast so that it comes back. So do you guys see now already we're having there's highlights up here versus shadows here, whereas when we started it was super flat. So just having the background lighter is helping already. Now the highlights are a little bright, so I'm going to drag those down so we get a little more detail in those petals where it was getting a bit too bright. And then this shot is about the flowers themselves, and the color is a bit muted. So I'm going to leave the light section, go down to color. And the difference between saturation and vibrance, I feel like vibrance addresses the whole shot a little better, whereas saturation, I tend to see the reds and pinks go first. Yep. So I'm going to start with vibrance.
Yeah, so saturation, like you said, it's global. That affects all the colors in the scene, where vibrance only attacks the muted colors.
Right. So I go vibrance first because saturation can look a little too much. Exactly. So then I follow up with saturation and just touch it a little lighter. So it ended up being vibrance 20, about 25 more, and plus 10 on saturation. So now here, because it was saying the background's a bit dark, and even though that helps things to pop out, it was making this shot look a little drab. So the last thing I'm going to do is do vignette, but this time I'm going to go the other direction and lighten the whole scene so that the flowers are a little more balanced with what's happening in the rest of the scene. So that ended up being 48. You can go, maybe that's a little much, let's say more like here. So now before and after with the vignette, it's just brightening the scene a little bit more in general. So here, if you do feel like the bee needs any more sharpness, go in and use denoise, but I felt like it was pretty sharp in this shot, so I didn't really need it. But here's where we were before, is super blah to nice and bright. And so even in these lighting conditions, this is what it looked like to me, because my eyes were making adjustments. And, when you look at things, you're looking at them with the camera that's built into your head, and they look pretty good. So the camera captured this, but the spirit of the shot is really this. So that's why I love Luminar, because it can bring back what whatever limitations you were dealing with at the time that you were shooting.
That is absolutely great. Now I'm going to pull you back up on the screen. Let's see. I had my, there we go. There, so I have you back up on screen.
Okay.
All right. Now, what's really cool, I love how you incorporated the bee into your shot. That was pretty cool because it gave a different element. So I'm exploring your image. So I'm looking at the flower, of course, but then I'm also looking at what's around it.
Mm-hmm.
So now, and again, some of that is luck and some of that's your personal patience.
Yeah,
Right?
indeed. And here I like that the bee showed up because there's a bunch of pollen dropping onto the petals beneath it too. And so it makes sense why there's, all this powder dropping onto the petals themselves. When if the bee wasn't there, I probably would have gone in and cleaned that up. But with the bee there, the context is there, and it makes sense that he's kicking that pollen onto the petals. So it did me a huge favor for him to show up as well, because it seems like the bees were landing there and the pollen was falling off and then they'd fly off. So yeah, I'm not sure that was all him, but it helped quite a bit.
Well, that's awesome. Well, hey, Laura, where can we find out more about you?
Oh, my website is lauratillinghast.com. And I do have an Instagram. It's Laura T Photo. I don't do Facebook anymore, but my Instagram's pretty active. And I'm doing lots of stuff for the Skylum Education online Skylum Academy. So you can find me there as well.
Awesome. And are you on Twitter?
No Twitter. No.
Gotcha. All right, I'm going to swap over the machine. I'm going to take over the screen for one moment. Let's see. One moment. Here we go. All right, good. So what I'm showing on the screen right now is the Skylum Academy that you just mentioned. Go to skylum.com/academy, and you'll see a wealth of information from getting started to tutorials. Under the tutorials, a lot of these here, you'll see Laura has some videos and tutorials that are in here. We have podcasting, and that's where the coffee breaks. You'll find the coffee breaks down in here. And of course, there'll be classes coming up. Nicole Young is doing one on capturing the beauty of nature. And I'll be doing one on the 15th of this month, up and running with Luminar 4. And most importantly, Laura, this is my absolute favorite, the user guide, the user manual. We joke about this because this is something Rich Harrington and myself spent a lot of time on. So if you wonder, like you were asking, some of the tools will do a detail enhancer.
Right.
So if I type in detail and I do a search, it'll give me all the tools that have that are used for detail. AI structure, map tool, the detail enhancer tool, and so on. So if I click on detail enhancer, on most of these, not only do you have the option of reading through and seeing what each and every slider does, but most of them have videos that are attached to this. So in the case that you and I were talking about just now, the small details, excuse me, they attack the small sets, so the sharpness of the fine details in an image. So at 0, the effect is not applied, and then moving it to the right, of course, it intensifies the clarity of the smallest detail in the image. Then we have medium, large, and then of course sharpen. I like to start with the medium first, and then I apply the other two, to give the appearance of sharpening. So, well, Laura, hey, once again, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your knowledge and your love for macro photography.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Well, hey, I'm Vanelli. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you again soon on the Luminar Coffee Break. One moment. Excuse me, my whole buttons are all offset. So let me find the ending. There we are. All right, we'll see you guys soon.